those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa Ackerman, Executive Director of Columbus Citizens Foundation, and I'm thrilled to see a full room in July. There's a myth that no New Yorkers are around, and that's clearly not true. And for those of you who are interested, we have one more event before we shut down for the summer and reopen in September, but it won't be the same as tonight, which is going to be a fascinating conversation, but we have another book talk in a few weeks, and that's our closing event. But tonight we're going to talk to Stacy about her new novel, which has only been out a few weeks, right?
I'd say 3 months.
Oh, okay. And is about a person who fascinates a lot of people who followed, I think, sort of the culture and social upheavals of the 70s and 80s in particular. And Oriana Fallaci was, she actually only died in 2006, so she hasn't been deceased a long time, but kind of her heyday was really the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And if you were to read a list of people she interviewed, it would be absolutely everyone who was important in the political and global arena in those decades. And she was a remarkable woman, I think, because she was intrepid, but she was also way ahead of her time. I mean, today we have female journalists on the front lines in every sector, but when she was starting out, that was quite unusual. And she also came from a rather humble background in Florence. I mean, her father was a cabinet maker. She was not of the elite class, and she was born in the 1920s, so, witnessed the full breadth of the 20th century. And so, we're going to find out tonight a little bit about you and your work and what inspired you to write about Oriana Fallaci, because it's difficult to write about somebody who really lived and then work them into a novel where presumably there's a little poetic license about their life. And so we want to hear from you, not me. So first of all, tell us a little bit about your writing career.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It really means a lot to me that you're all here. My writing career, let's see, my parents are immigrants from Greece. So when I said, I think I want to be a writer, the answer was, no, you don't. And it was like, don't you want to be an engineer and things like that. So I always was able to write, and I, of course, loved reading. So I did something practical with it, which was advertising and public relations. But always on the side, I kept up the writing. So I would write a short story and I would try to publish it. I wrote a couple of other novels before this one, and they didn't really go anywhere, but I didn't really push. And then I started writing screenplays. Those didn't go anywhere either. Again, I didn't know what I was doing, but I was always writing. But when I got to a certain age, and some family, I lost a few dear members of my family, I realized, life is very short. I always wanted to do this, and I'm going to do this. So I wrote the book, and it took me, several years to write and research and all that, but it took even longer to find a publisher. I wanted to traditionally publish, and so the whole journey was about 11 years. So I finally accomplished what I always wanted to do when I was 10 years old. If I can, and what's funny about that is that Oriana Fallaci wanted to be a novelist. Yes, she didn't want to be a journalist, she wanted to be a novelist. And her parents, she was poor, and it was Florence during, they had just gotten over World War II. And her parents said, no, you can't earn a living that way. And her mother said, you should become a doctor. Yeah. So she passed and enrolled in University of Florence, and she started to become a doctor. She was going to become a psychiatrist, which is kind of what you become if you're a writer. You try to figure people out and character. And unfortunately, her father had a car accident, and she had to support the family. So she was only 16, and she dropped out, and she muscled her way into a journalism job by lying about her age. And she started working at 16, and she never stopped. So
we definitely want to hear from you about, what sparked your interest in having her as the protagonist. But I'm curious too. I mean, I'm sure the answer to this is yes, but you must have had to do a lot of research in order to decide how to position her in the novel and which aspects of her life to focus on. And I'm curious, I mean, her interviews are out there, but to really drill down into who she was, what kind of archives did you have to access?
Well, first of all, research is the most fun part of writing such a book because you don't have to write, you can just read. So much fun. So I was just always reading about her. When something fascinates me, and you probably, I just love to read about it. It's fun. And I never lost my interest in her. Even today, if a new article pops up about her, I always have to read it. I read her own books, which are on this table for you to look at later. A Man, Nothing and So Be It, which is about Vietnam. She was a war correspondent and went to Vietnam 7 times. There's a book there called The Egotists because she also interviewed Hollywood celebrities. She went to Hollywood and interviewed like all the top names of the 50s and 60s. But the most fun part of researching was going to Boston University where they have her archives. So they have her original letters, manuscripts, articles, and most fascinatingly, they have her original cassette tapes of when she interviewed world leaders. And you can put on headphones and listen to her voice, and then I'm just going to read you a list of the people, the kinds of people that she interviewed. Lisa mentioned that they were all the newsmakers at the time. So she interviewed Robert Kennedy, the Dalai Lama, Henry Kissinger, Golda Meir, Yasser Arafat, Muammar Gaddafi, the Shah of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini, Indira Gandhi, Walter Cronkite, Sean Connery, Ingrid Bergman, Dean Martin, Federico Fellini, Sammy Davis Jr., Paul Newman, Alfred Hitchcock, it just goes on and on. So Boston University, and by the way, anybody can go. You just make an appointment at the university and they bring you say which boxes you want. They have everything in beautiful boxes. You put on white gloves and then you're like a archaeologist or investigator.
Fantastic. When did you first discover her as a figure?
So a lot of you have asked me this question. So I'm going to answer. What made me so fascinated? Or obsessed.
Fascinated sounds.
Fascinated? Okay. What made me fascinated? I was 23 years old, and I will be very honest with you, that was 40 years ago. And I was on a Greek island. It was called Folegandros, and it was really remote in the 80s, okay? And I was waiting for a ferry to go back to Athens, and I was wasting time because it wasn't time for the boat yet. So I was in a souvenir shop, and I saw a book in English, which was rare at the time, and it was called A Man by Oriana Fallaci. I'll show you, I have the hardcover, but it was the soft cover of this book right here. And a few of you have told me you even read it. Oh yeah. So this is a fabulous book. It's her memoir of her love affair with a Greek man named Alexander Panagoulis. So I was Greek. Full confession, I'm not Italian. Is that okay? All right. So I'm Greek, and I read the book, and then I read all her other books, and that's what started my fascination. And basically, it's a fabulous love story. It's very dramatic. But also, I was really interested because I learned a lot about my own Greek history by reading this book. Because Alexander Panagoulis was a Greek hero of the 1960s and 70s when Greece had a dictatorship. And he resisted the dictatorship, and he was an activist. And I didn't know all that about Greece. I didn't know that the dictator Papadopoulos, had tortured people and imprisoned them and exiled them. And that's what happened to Alexander. He was imprisoned for 5 years and tortured. And when he got out, Oriana went to interview him as a journalist, and she did what you're not supposed to do, which is she fell in love. And she was 44 years old, and he was 34. And she was at the top of her profession. She was world famous. I hope that's not mine. She was world famous, and he was unemployed. He was just out of prison. And she lived in Italy, and he lived in Greece, but they managed to get together. They had the same values and the same, they were both interested in fighting for freedom and against oppression and authoritarianism. And she took him back to Florence and Greve in Chianti, where she had a farmhouse, a country house. And then when Greece's dictatorship fell, they went back to Greece, and he was elected a member of parliament, and they only had 3 years together, and I won't say why because it'll be spoiling the book.
So I won't reveal what happened, but I will say that, she had great discipline, and she did not fall in love with any of the other people she interviewed, but they must have really shared an incredible bond, because she grew up with parents who were very well known as people fighting against fascism in Italy.
Yes.
And while fascism was long gone by the time they knew each other, its specter was still there. It's not that people had forgotten it. And then, he had come out of this incredible situation of having been incarcerated and tortured, and so they must have had something that she rarely found, which was this incredible understanding of what motivated even a lot of her work. But one of the things that fascinates me about him is that he wrote a book of poetry in Italian.
Yes.
And I find poetry impossible in my own language, so I can't conceive of writing it in another language. But I've also wondered that curiosity that, he was not Italian. He knew Italian, but writing in another language is...
A couple of things. It's a long story, but just to make it short, he deserted the army, the Greek army, because he didn't want to be in the army of the dictator, and he went into hiding in Italy. So he spent some time there. So, when you're in a country, you learn. He was in prison for 5 years. He had a lot of time to study. He studied Italian, one of the things he did. So his poetry that he wrote actually won a prize in Italy also, the Viareggio Prize it's called. But going back to your initial point, absolutely, he reminded Oriana of her father, because her father was one of the leaders of the resistance in Florence to the Nazis. The Nazis had occupied Florence, and her father was, passing secret messages and guns, and, they had resistance headquarters at Manelli Tower, if anybody's been to Florence. It's on the Ponte Vecchio. There's still that tower there. So Oriana's father even drafted her help into the resistance. She was only 14. You'll see one of the pictures here where she's on her bicycle. That's how old she was. And he had her doing that, like carrying secret messages in her braids, and carrying a grenade in her bicycle basket, and messaging. She a 14-year-old child. So she worked with her father. She looked up to him, and of course she got to learn to hate, fascists and hate occupiers, and she grew up in fear in her own city. So Alekos, his name is Alexander Alekos, is his nickname, and in Italy he's known as Alessandro. So Alekos, did the same thing as her father. He fought the dictatorship, and so she just, they had the same values, and she didn't know that many people who would put themselves in harm's way, like they're physically, like the abuse he took for 5 years, without saying, I'm sorry, you're right, you're a good dictator. Like he never gave in, he never bent. And that fascinated her, because the bottom line is that courage fascinated her. She thought it was rare in people. She didn't think a lot of world leaders had any courage. And so she was really fascinated her whole life with what makes some people courageous and other people cowards.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about, your book specifically, because I'm a big fan of historical fiction, because like you, I feel you often learn a tremendous amount, even though it's embedded in a novel and you get invested in the characters. I can't even count the number of books I've really enjoyed where I've come away going, well, now I know a lot about the history of England that I never knew before, or even American history in some instances. But I love the escapism of reading about, there was an author who wrote a series of books about, things that unfolded in the 19th century in the Ottoman Empire. And so you gradually learned a tremendous amount if you read a couple of these books. And so I'm curious because you became fascinated with Ornella. It took a long time to, gestate the book, and you were doing this research. And at some point you have to start working on, the structure of the novel and what pieces of her personality are going to be in there. And on your website, there's a clip of her on the Dick Cavett show, and she's talking about her interview with Henry Kissinger. And even though it's just a short clip on your website, her personality really comes through, and she's both, fascinating and witty and holding her own against, questions, and she cuts an incredible figure. And then there's a, very famous story of her interviewing the Ayatollah Khomeini and, chafing at the idea that she had to wear a chador to sit through the interview, and then he basically tells her she's really unworthy to wear it anyway.
He insults her.
And so she says, well, if that's the case, I'm not wearing it. And, few people had that kind of courage. And few people would have lived to tell the tale, too. I mean, people, if you show fear, you often get retaliation, but she really stood her ground. So she's an incredible figure to try and put into a novel. So, and you've obviously dug into her childhood as well. And so, I mean, how did you decide which Ornella Fallaci was going to end up in the book?
Well, I think what everything you just described is the reason why I stayed with it for 12 years, because she is so interesting. And I was trying to get to the bottom of her myself. Like, what makes this woman so, I'm not going to say that word, have so much chutzpah, like have so much, fire, have so much confidence. Like, where does this come from? Comes from a little, a humble beginnings. She dominates the world. She conquers the world. She has international fame. How does that happen? And by the way, she was about 4'11", her English, not good at all in the beginning, got a lot better. I don't know, I think I just fell in love, and one of my friends said I lived with her for so long that I ended up channeling her into the book, and that could be. Because also the book went through a lot of different revisions. In earlier versions, there wasn't a lot of her, how she made it in her career, like there wasn't a lot of her childhood and how she kind of climbed. But, an editor told me I should have more of that, so I went back and put more of that. I consider this book a good introduction to Oriana, and what's thrilling me is that readers are saying, now I bought her other books, I've been Googling for hours, this is all your fault, Stacy. But that's exactly what I want to happen, is like for people to read this novel and be entertained. It's a great love story, and it's inspiring about a trailblazing woman. But then I want people to remember her and read up on her so that she kind of remains in history. Like, I don't want her to be forgotten. And she has been forgotten here, not in Europe. In Europe, and especially in Italy, but other places, Greece, Spain, she's a household name. So,
well, that's interesting, actually. we've forgotten. She lived here a long time.
She lived 8 blocks from here, folks, for decades, and literally made world headlines. She interviewed Henry Kissinger, and he called it his most disastrous conversation with any member of the press because he really said embarrassing things, and she quoted him. And it ended up Nixon stopped talking to him. He was the Secretary of State at the time, National Security Advisor for Nixon. She's amazing, and for women especially, I think she's an amazing role model. So I don't want her to be forgotten. She, interestingly, most people in America know Barbara Walters, but except for young people, right, Isabella?
I know her.
So Barbara Walters, they were born the same year. She and Oriana. They had the same type of family upbringing. They had economic difficulties. Barbara had to go to work early to support her family because her father had a breakdown. They were, the first in their fields. They established themselves by doing the interview. That was their domain. And they both interviewed celebrities and world figures, and often the same figures. But I have to tell you, Oriana did she interviewed them usually before. And that kind of happens in print journalism. Often the print comes first and then the TV. Also, Barbara Walters went to Oriana's memorial service at the New York Public Library the year after she died. So, did they know each other?
They
certainly knew of each other.
They must have been in the same room at some moment in time.
So I think that, Oriana kind of needs to be remembered on par with Barbara Walters, and also Mike Wallace, who was known as a very tough interviewer on 60 Minutes.
So, the writing process, obviously at a certain moment you're in a rhythm, and undoubtedly, as you've already kind of alluded to, editors say more of this, less of that.
Yeah.
I mean, was there something that you just said to yourself, if the editor says that's going, I'm fighting for it, or,
Absolutely, yes.
Or, was there something that you went, oh my God, the editor is completely right, that's stupid, I shouldn't have had that.
Yeah, completely right was, yes, of course, we should know how she made it to the top of her field, because in early versions, I just had her kind of be at the top of her field, but that made a lot of sense to me, because we all want to know how people live their lives and careers. Well, this is kind of funny, but my editor said there were a few too many, sexies, and said that I should take a few out, and I did not. So I'll leave you with that. No, they're not full-on sexies, trust me. But I thought
it's not Ornella Bodice Ripper.
No, absolutely not. But I wanted that romance. I wanted that tension. I wanted that in there. So I did not take that out. So there.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, is there anything you want to tell us about the book? We should all read it, obviously. And is there something that we should be especially, or should we just read it and see where it takes us?
Well, I would love for you to read it. I could tell you many things, but it took a long time to publish. I think I mentioned this because publishers in America are very they want to sell a lot of books. So they're oh, she's not very well known. So, I really had to fight to get this out there. And, I hope my goal is to, for her to, remain in public awareness. And so just spread the word, talk about it. What else can I tell you? I'd like to hear from you if you have questions. Yes?
So how did you finally get it published?
I don't know. I paid off someone under the table. No. Okay, it's a good story actually. So I had 2 different agents, and neither of them sold it. And I finally separated from my second agent. I was like, okay, you've tried, it's like having a real estate agent for your house. If they don't sell it after a while, you say bye-bye. So I separated, and then I put it for sale by owner, basically. I took it myself, and I submitted it to the very few publishers who will accept unagented manuscripts. Usually they want you to have an agent. So there were a few, and one of them got back to me right away, and it's the one that published the book. They're called Delphinium Books. And why? Because the editorial director loves Italy, loves Italians, speaks Italian, and lived in Italy for a little while. And he's an American guy. He's a former New Yorker. So you have to get that lucky connection, that chemistry going. So that's how I finally got published. That and never giving up. But I could not give up because I was writing about a woman who never gave up.
So there's a question here in the
So,
front
you know.
and then one in the back. So we'll go here first.
Do you know, or are there any people who knew Oriana personally that are still alive? And if so, were you able to speak with them?
I haven't spoken to anyone who knew her. Couple of things on that. So I mentioned initially that I wrote it that I was writing screenplays. So I thought initially that her love affair with the Greek guy Alekos would make a great movie. So I wrote it as a screenplay, and I got the interest of the head of 20th Century Fox, who happened to be a Greek American man named Jim Giannopoulos. And he said, I love Oriana Fallaci, and so I got him a meeting with her. She was very reclusive, very private. She lived on 61st Street around 3rd and Lex. She owned a townhouse, and he went there. And he had a great time with her. He remembers it as one of his best meetings of his life. They drank whiskey, they smoked, she used to smoke these cigarillo things, these brown things. She fed him, but at the end she refused to give him the rights to her life story. So he met her. I didn't go along. I could have, I suppose, but I didn't want to be like the third wheel. I thought we'd have a better chance of accomplishing what we wanted with just him. There is somebody who's written a biography of Oriana. Initially, she let it be authorized, like she hired him basically to write her biography. His name is Santo Diarico, I think. He's a academic out of the Midwest. And you can find these books, probably out of print, but on Amazon. So she said, yes, I want you to write my biography. And they had lots and lots of meetings together. And he recorded her and this and that. And then, of course, she wanted approval. And she would never approve of what he was writing. And in the end, she fired it. But this poor guy had now spent years, on the book and had all these hours of tape, so he published it anyway. So it's unauthorized. So he met her, and I, of course, read that. But but a few of you have told me, I have a friend who knew Oriana and who spent time with her, so I hope to kind of go back to those people.
And there was a question in the back.
Yes, I'm not sure why you call this a novel.
Okay, I'll explain.
Can you explain?
Shall I explain?
Yes.
So historical novels or historical fiction is a category. It's popular. There's a book out right now. It's called Jackie, and it's about Jackie Kennedy. It just came out like a few weeks ago. But it's a novel. It's not a biography. What you do in a novel, right, at least what I did and what most of us do, is you try to stay close to the history, to the record, to what we know, the facts. But we don't know everything, So that's where you fictionalize. I'll give you an example. I'm a creative writer, so I like to write about emotions. I like to, so we don't know what Oriana was feeling when she went to the White House to interview Henry Kissinger. But I can imagine what she was feeling. So that's what you're going to get in a novel that you're not going to get in a biography. One more thing is I love to write dialogue, probably from my screenplay writing days, because screenplays are almost all dialogue. you can't write a lot of dialogue in a biography because nobody was there to record them, right? But you can in a novel. You can imagine what she said to Alekos when they were falling in love, or what she said to her mother and father when she wanted to be a writer. So that's the difference. But in the back of the book, you'll see that I wrote a few of the things that I fictionalized so that you'll know. And then I love movies and books based on a true story. And when I watch them or read them, I then run to Google and read like 6 different articles about the real person to try to figure out what was true, what was false, what they make up, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, I guess also in historical fiction, you know, you can invent, you know, a party or a dinner party
Yes.
or a lunch that helps you transition from one
Absolutely.
moment in time to another,
Yes.
where somebody could be sitting at lunch reminiscing about something, and you don't know whether that happened or not, but it
There's
helps move the story
There's
along.
a lot, and basically, I mean, today, you know, people like to be entertained. You know, I think novels draw you in more than, let's say, a straight biography. I love biographies, don't get me wrong, but I also love novels based on a true story.
Yes, there's-
Question, just one more question.
Yeah,
Have
and then
you
we'll
had,
move to the
have
other
you
side
had
of it.
any response from her family about how you depicted her in your novel?
No, I haven't. She doesn't have much of a family, and I'll leave it at that because I also don't want to spoil what's in the book. But yeah.
There was a question right here.
Yes. Was she an independent journalist, and did she sell her interviews and stories, or did she work for particular
So that's a
publication?
great question. She worked her whole career. She was really loyal, you know. She worked her whole career for a news, I'll call it a news magazine. It was the size of like the Daily News or the Post, and it was that kind of paper. It was called L'Europeo, and it was a weekly, and it came out, I think it was based in Milan. She worked there her whole career. But when she would get like a big scoop with, I don't know, Fellini or Alfred Hitchcock, she would first publish it in her own paper, but then she could resell it, reprint it. And she'd get paid some big bucks from places like Life magazine, the New York Times, the New Republic. Yeah.
I mean, in Italy, she wrote for Corriere della Sera quite a bit too. So, I mean, I don't think
As a freelance, perhaps after
Mm.
L'Europeo, because I don't know if she
I mean, that was her base, was Europeo.
Yeah.
But I know that she had a byline with some frequency in Corriere della
Okay.
Sera. But
Actually,
it may have been what you said,
Here we
syndicated
go,
after.
I don't know, it's just a timely comment. There was an article, I actually thought of you in the book yesterday, there was an article in Corriere della Sera about her nemesis, who's from Napoli, another journalist, another Italian journalist, where he admitted that he actually had great respect for her all along.
Finally.
So that was, that was
Yeah.
a big.
Yeah, so, as a pioneer, they basically hated Oriana during her career in Italy because she was, outshining all the men and getting paid more and, being internationally known.
Yes.
So, for instance, in my book, they're like, how did she get that interview with Robert Kennedy? They were always like, the asides were always that, oh, it must have been that she slept with somebody, or, like the typical things that they said about women. And of course, when she first started writing in journalism, she couldn't write about politics or business or anything that the men wrote about. She had to write about parties and fashion and stuff like that. Because they just thought that a woman cannot do that. Like, she doesn't have the mental capacity, But Oriana, her celebrity interviews helped her a lot when she went to California and Hollywood because they sold a lot. She got a lot of readers. And so, money talks. And then she wanted to go cover the moon landings of 1969, the American astronauts. So she got to do that. And she said writing about the moon, changed her whole career because after that, she was able to write about anything. And she said, oh, okay, well, I want to do world leaders. And that's what happened. but she, it took her years to get there.
You had a question?
Yes,
Stacy, I'm fascinated by everything you said, but
Thanks.
you knew so much about her that I'm so looking forward to reading her book. But you pursued it as a novel. Why? So you could put in some juicier stuff or what?
I don't know. I'm not academic enough to do a bio. Bios have, at least the way I think they should be, is they have a million footnotes, and it's just a more technical exercise.
Yeah,
But believe me, part of what I did was that.
I'm sure.
But the more fun part for me was to visualize it as a scene, and what do characters say to each other? It's just more fun.
Right.
I imagine in today's world, getting a biography published is also even harder than getting a novel
I don't
published,
know.
right?
I'm not sure. I think nonfiction is probably easier.
Really?
Yeah.
I would think it could be even more of a niche audience, I don't know.
It's a niche audience, but for some reason nonfiction's easier to publish than fiction.
Yes, I think it would be,
Really?
because you can say here.
Yes, Sophia.
Yes, question. What did she do in Vietnam? Was she in the North, in the South?
Okay, so she interviewed both generals, both the North. Yes, she got a rare interview with the North general. Forget his name. One of them is Jap. I forget the other one. But she embedded basically with the American Army. So she was, and she went 7 times. Some say 9 times. She wore the uniform. It'll come up in pictures, the boots, the whole thing, the helmet. And one of the things, and it's a scene in my book, she even went on a bombing mission with a fighter pilot. You read it? Yeah. And why did she do this? Because she wanted to kill people? No. She actually went to war and to cover war because she thought war was the most disgusting thing that human beings do and the most horrifying thing. And she wanted to understand, how do they do it? Like, how do you kill another person? So she went on the bombing mission to kind of be there and feel what it was like for this fighter pilot to be dropping these napalm bombs. And, that's a risk to her life. She constantly risked her life. I think they do like 8GS, which is some gravitational something or other, like many people throw up in in bombing missions. Some lose their eyesight for hours, crazy stuff. But she wasn't afraid. She also went to Mexico City to cover the student protests of the Olympic Games in 1968. And it was this giant square in Mexico City, and there were thousands of people there, and she was up on a balcony with the students who had a bullhorn, and they were making speeches, and all of a sudden, armed trucks came onto the plaza, and, soldiers started pouring out, helicopters were going from above, and she got shot. She got shot 3 times. And they bounced her down the stairs and threw her in a room for dead. And she was like, I'm not dead, I'm bleeding, and she had to get herself to a hospital. And then she reported from the hospital bed the next day. This is the kind of person we're talking about. Yeah. Other questions? Yes?
Yeah. Was there a favorite interview that she had, or subject matter? And
For me or for her?
Oh, both, say. All right, both.
Let me just read you a few quotes, like for instance, of things she said to people. The Henry Kissinger, I think, is a really great one. And by the way, her interviews are collected in a book, and it's in print still from Rizzoli, and it's called Interview with History and Power, I think, and it's over there if you want to check it out. But, so to Henry Kissinger, one of her first questions was, and this was, during the Vietnam War while it was still raging, don't you find, Dr. Kissinger, that it's been a useless war? And he said, on this we can agree. And that was like, wow. that went around the world as news. And she also asked him, why do you think, what accounts for your reputation as a Washington playboy? Because he was. Kissinger was, he was dating this one, he was dating that one, he was always in the society pages. And she said, what accounts for this reputation? You're more popular than President Nixon. So he kind of thought about it, and he made the mistake of likening himself to a cowboy that rides into town like Moscow or Peking all alone to solve world issues. And whoa, the newspapers went nuts caricaturing him as, the Lone Ranger, he had a cowboy hat on, and Nixon got really peeved with this because he was like, what am I doing? You're doing it all? No, I don't think so. So that was Kissinger. I think that's one of the famous interviews. But this is the kind of question she would put to Muammar Gaddafi. She interviews him in the desert. There's armed guards all around, and she says, I haven't told you that you are a dictator yet, but I will now. To the Ayatollah Khomeini, I'll tell you that story, but she said, you are a frightening man. Your regime lives on fear. So what happened with Ayatollah Khomeini is that Oriana went there fully, respectfully, with a chador on, which is, everybody knows, covers from head to toe. And initially she was just going to go with like a black kerchief that she brought and a black shawl of her mother's, but she was told by her translator that that wasn't enough, so he got her a chador from his wife and she put it on, and she was there for 10 days waiting for this interview in the holy city of Qom. Finally, he agreed to see her because he was like, I'll see you today, I'll see you tomorrow, whatever. So she finally gets to see him. They're sitting on the carpet, and his son is there, and she's recording it, and she says, about this chador, how come you make women wear it? It's hard to move in it, it's hard to walk in it. And he got mad, and he said, well, the chador is only for young and respectable women. You don't have to wear it. So she got really, insulted because they had been talking also about how she covered war in the Vietnam War and that she slept in trenches with soldiers. So he was intimating that, that somehow she wasn't respectable. So she said, oh, I don't have to wear it? Okay. And she took it off right there. He jumped up and he left. And she would not move from that rug until his son got him to promise to come back the next day, because she had waited 10 days for this interview. So the son says, all right, you can come back tomorrow on one condition: you do not ask about the chador. She's like, okay. So she comes back the next day. What do you think her first question was? She says to him, about the chador. And he laughed. He laughed. Yeah. So, yes, Isabella.
Do you have a favorite scene from the novel?
Ooh. Well,
What was the question?
do I have a favorite scene from the novel? I'm a romantic, so definitely when she goes to interview him and they're kind of talking but falling in love. I love that. I also love the ending scene.
Me too.
Thank you. I love the ending scene. The ending changed a couple of times, but there's some tough parts in the story, but I really wanted to end on an up note. And it's interesting because the last scene is based on truth. Oriana was honored by the region of Tuscany in Manhattan somewhere, maybe at the consulate at the end of her life. And she had cancer and she died in her 70s. But she is honored at the end of the book, and she realizes some things about her life in that scene. Yeah.
So we're coming to an end, which
Okay.
is very sad because we could sit here and talk to you for
Okay.
quite a while.
All right.
So when you do something like this, you obviously have to take a deep breath, but you're also obviously promoting the book and doing a lot with it. But have you started on your next project?
Yes, I have actually. So my next project is going to be another historical novel because I guess I'm now addicted to this form, and I learned a few things about it, so I might as well stick with it. Yeah, it's going to be another Greek story. It's going to be based on the island of Scorpios, which was owned by Aristotle Onassis. And it's not going to be about Jackie and Ari because we've heard a lot about them. And there's a lot of books out there about them. But I want to write about their kids because, well, Christina and Alexander were Onassis' kids, and John and Caroline. And basically they were thrown together on that island for 5 summers. Yeah, and they were stepbrothers and sisters. And the really interesting thing to me, one of the things that kind of like sends little chills, is that John Kennedy Jr. flew with Alexander. Alexander was a pilot. And so a lot of his interest in flying got fed over those years with his older stepbrother. And sadly, they both died in plane crashes at very young ages. So I think that's like a really super coincidence. Yeah, so that's it, if I ever finish.
You will definitely finish. What?
Do you consider
I consider it a Greek-Italian story. Absolutely a Greek-Italian story, and a very hot Mediterranean love story as well.
The good news is that Greece and Italy are very intertwined.
They're very intertwined.
As anybody knows,
They're very intertwined.
southern Italy is filled with
Yes.
Greek settlements that we can
Yes.
still go visit today, and there's a lot of cultural interaction over the centuries.
Absolutely.
So even when the next book comes out, we'll just consider you
Thank
Mediterranean,
you.
and you'll
Thank
come
you.
back.
I love that. Thank you so much. Great. So this fabulous bookstore from Brooklyn came all the way, and they're selling books out there. My publisher will let me publish this next book if I sell enough books. So if you need a gift, if you need something for yourself, a nice winner out there. Thank you.